Into camera?
You're good now.
Right. All right. Hi, and welcome to MnRI Arduino Gadgets. This is part of a series of videos where I'm going to show you how to build useful, interesting, and fun gadgets with a simple Arduino kit. And there's some stuff here that you might not see in your basic tutorials. I'm going to assume that you know how to do some basic Arduino things like putting your code onto the Arduino, putting electronics on a breadboard. So if you aren't familiar with those, there are some great tutorials online that we will have links to so you can get that basic knowledge down before you try to build this stuff. Today I'm going to show you the temperature-controlled fan gadget. This gadget kind of mimics how a thermostat works or an AC controlling unit works. Basically, the farther from a target temperature you are, the more you turn on your heating or your cooling. In this case, a DC motor with a little fan on it. Now, this gadget does use a DC motor, so we're going to need to use a breadboard power supply. Please do not try to run this directly off your Arduino. There's a decent chance you'll fry your board, and we just don't want that to happen. All right, so first of all, I'm going to show you how this gadget works. There are 3 buttons here. Button 1 controls the fan mode. There are 3 different fan modes. The fan can either be off, it can be controlled by the temperature sensor, or it can be controlled manually. So right now the fan is off, as you can see right here. The second 2 buttons are for either turning the fan speed up or down when the fan is on manual control. If I press the button once, we're going to move into temperature controlled mode. So you can see there's a T79 there, showing me that the fan is temperature controlled at 79%. Press it once more, we get to manual mode, and now I can control it with button presses. Oops. If I don't disconnect the potentiometer, which is easy to do. And if you turn down the speed low enough, below about 50%, it'll actually just turn the fan off. And we can also see the temperature readout here on the LCD. So the fan's default configuration is that it will be on at 50 degrees and on full power at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In between that, it scales up and down evenly, but you can, of course, change that in the code. So this circuit is pretty complicated on the breadboard, so take your time. As usual, I recommend splitting it up into the different components. So for this gadget, we've got the LCD screen, we've got 3 different buttons, we have a temperature sensor, and a DC motor, which requires a motor microcontroller. This potentiometer is also required for the LCD. And we need to use the breadboard power supply, because we're going to be using more current than the Arduino's internal power supply is recommended for. So, again, take your time. First things first, on the breadboard supply, make sure that the jumpers are placed on the 5-volt. Let's do on that one? Okay. Let's make sure the jumpers are placed on the 5-volt portion of the voltage selector rails here. They might be on the 3-volt, 3.3 volts, like that. So if they are, just make sure they're moved to the 5-volt selector. Okay, both sides. Next, we'll plug in the breadboard power supply. It fits perfectly on this first little section here, so we can just plug it in like that. Great. All right, so the power supply is now in. The only other things we need to do to have the power supply finished is we will plug in the Arduino to the power supply, and we will make sure that they share a common ground by putting a pin into the ground rail on the breadboard and then connecting that to the ground on the Arduino. Next, let's lay our components out onto the board. Let's put down our buttons. So we have 3 of them. You can put these pretty close, but wherever you want to put them works. Now the LCD screen. Now this I'll do towards the bottom so that I have space up top. Let me see if that's going to work actually. Not quite actually. I'm going to move this. This might want to be cut, but maybe it's good to show that sometimes I make decisions that I decide to go back on. These LCDs are hard to get up because there's so many pins. There we go. All right, let's shift that down. So I'm going to put this on the 4th row of that breadboard quadrant. Great. Now the temperature sensor, which I'll put right here, noting where the signal pin is, and the L293D motor driver, make sure there's a little notch in it. So there's a little notch in this guy. Make sure that you put that notch on the breadboard. You're going to want it facing away from the end. You could put it either way, but just make sure that it's facing the same way it is in the schematic. Otherwise, you're going to be connecting to the wrong pins. And I do need the potentiometer for the LCD. Okay, now let's wire things. Let's start with the buttons. For each button, we have a single ground. These are black wires because ground typically is used for black, or sorry, black is typically used for ground, but that's just to help you remember. So you can plug those 3 all directly into the ground rail. And it can be a little tricky to get them in. There's a lot of stuff going on there, but that's okay. And now for those buttons, we have 3 signal wires. So we're going to put 1 signal wire here, and it might be a good idea to put the wire on the breadboard end at least at the same time as you're doing it for the grounds. Otherwise, you need to squeeze your hands in. But there we go, 3 signal wires. And these connect to pins 13, 12, and 11 on the Arduino. So let's get those all plugged in. Okie dokie. Now let's do the LCD screen. So the LCD screen, we have 4 data cables. We have a bunch of different power and ground wires, which I'm getting gathered up right now. So let's attach these. So we'll go from right to left. We'll start with the ground for the LED, which goes right there, and then the power for the LED. So power and ground, 2 power and ground. Next, we're going to plug in our 4 data cables. These are just blue because I like them that way. We're going to D7, D6, and D5, and D4. And remember with these, it is really easy to get them crossed, so make sure that you don't cross them when you're plugging them in. And I'll just go ahead and plug them in right now. We're going to plug D7 into 10, D6 into pin 9 on the Arduino, D5 into pin 8. I'm going to hold that for a second there. And D4 into pin 7. Okay, so our data cables are now plugged in. Now we need the enable pin. I'll use this orange wire for that. That can go into pin 6. We need a ground. This is for the read-write pin. This is what you would use to basically turn on or off the ability to read or write the LCD, but we always want it on, so we'll put it to ground. And the RS pin goes to pin 4 on the Arduino. Sorry, that's pin 5 on the Arduino. The RS pin goes to pin 5 on the Arduino. Almost there. We have to add our power and ground, VS, or VSS and VDD. Ground is VSS, power is VDD. Again, you can see this on the schematic. And then the one other thing that I'm going to do is I need to add the potentiometer. and the potentiometer is plugged into pin VO on the LCD. So let's make sure our potentiometer also has a ground and a power. Okay, so that should be our LCD there. Now we need to plug in our temperature sensor. This is fortunately pretty easy. Temperature sensor requires a ground. Make sure we get it on the right pin. Yep, that's good. So ground goes right to ground. It requires a power. That goes to power. And then it also requires a signal. And that signal is going to go to pin 4 on the Arduino. Okay, last bit here, we've got our motor driver microcontroller. And this one is the one that's a little trickier. So there are a bunch of pins on the one side here. We're just going to use the one side. And remember, make sure that notch is in the right place. So we will start with first pin, which goes to pin 2 on the Arduino. This is one of the direction pins that tells the motor which way to turn. The second direction pin is going to be on pin 1 on the Arduino. And then we've got the actual motor. So the actual motor's power, positive terminal, goes right here. Now we have the ground, and that can go, we could put it in this rail, or we can put it in that rail, that's fine. And then we have, this is the enable pin for the, oops, sorry, my bad. We have the ground pin actually for the motor, the enable pin for the motor driver, and that goes to pin 0. Okay, and then the power pin for the driver board. So to run through that again quickly, we've got the 2 directions, we've got the motor's power, we've got the ground for the driver board, a space, then the motor's ground, the enable pin, and the driver board's power. So now if I plug this in, and I've done my wiring right, I'm going to press the button to turn on the power supply. And we should see, I got to move my hands out of the way of the fan, but we see that everything is running properly. Excellent. So this is a really complicated one. Make sure to go slow, make sure to refer to the schematic. With the motor driver, the little L293 chip, make sure that that's placed the right way with the notch towards the LCD. And make sure that your breadboard power supplies are switched to the 5-volt supply, not the 3.3 volt, that's not enough power. This is a pretty busy gadget, breadboard-wise, but I still have a few ideas for you that you could try to make this better. Now, number one thing is this little temperature sensor here, the DHT11, reads the temperature of the room, but also the humidity. So if you wanted to, you could try to print out the humidity on the LCD. You could try and make the fan control based on humidity instead of temperature, or a combination of both. Another thing that you could do is you could replace the speed control, the buttons, with a potentiometer. So you can control the fan speed with a knob instead of by pressing buttons. I think that would be pretty cool. A last option would be to make the temperature range at which the fan turns on configurable. So you could add buttons to, add a degree or remove a degree from the top. You could make a potentiometer that kind of slides a 20-degree window around, whatever you feel like. These are mostly programming related things because there's not really a whole lot of space left on the breadboard, but those I think are some good ideas that you could try. I hope that you build this gadget for yourself and have fun. I'll see you soon for another MnRI Arduino Gadgets, and stay curious and have fun building things in the meantime.